Hello and welcome. You're watching Race to Power. My name is Mohammed Saleh. And on the show today, the United States has again struck a vessel to try and clamp down on narco trafficking. This happens to be the 8th vessel that's been struck by the United States in the last 45 days, and the second one that it has struck in the Pacific Ocean. And in India, the battle for the state of Bihar is heating up. The India Alliance has named Tejasvi Yadav as its chief ministerial face and is now daring the ruling JDU-BJP combined to project a chief ministerial face. But let's of course start with this big story from the United States of America in what is quite clearly and arguably the most high-profile mayoral election that we've witnessed in our times in the city of New York. The stage is set for a showdown for this mayoral contest. Now, the second and the final round of debate took place on Wednesday with 3 candidates not just making their case but also taking a swipe at their political rivals. Now, during the televised debate, the Democrat Zohran Mamdani, the independent Andrew Cuomo, and the Republican Curtis Silver butted heads over one name, and that is Donald Trump. Well, Mamdani and Cuomo took a swipe at the American president and the potential power clashes in New York. The Republican candidate berated his rivals, saying that they can never stand up to Trump. Listen in to this pretty interesting exchange.
Look, Donald Trump ran on 3 promises. He ran on creating the single largest deportation force in American history. He ran on going after his political enemies, and he ran on lowering the cost of living. If he wants to talk to me about the 3rd piece of that agenda, I will always be ready and willing. But if he wants to talk about how to pursue the 1st and 2nd piece of that agenda at the expense of New Yorkers, I will fight him every single step of the way.
You're going to have to confront President Trump. He is hyper-aggressive, and he is going to overstep his bounds. And you are going to have to confront him. And you can beat him. I confronted him, and I have beaten him. He was going to quarantine New York during COVID, and I stopped him. He was going to cut aid to federal programs, and I stopped him.
My adversaries have decided to bump chests with President Trump to prove who's more macho. You can't beat Trump. He holds most of the cards. He's already cut federal funding for Medicaid, for the SNAP program, and is threatening to cut funds for NYCHA. So if you're all of a sudden going to get adversarial, you're going to lose. And who gets hurt? The people of New York City.
So the election is scheduled to be held on the 4th of November. Early voting begins this weekend on the 25th of October. Now, several polls are putting Zohran Mamdani in a very comfortable position as a front-runner with a 2-digit lead over his main political rival, Andrew Cuomo. So as New York's mayoral candidates make a last-ditch attempt to try and woo the city's residents, a short distance away, the ICE officials carried out raids, cracking down on street vendors in Manhattan. Now, the raid prompted protests with many Americans filming and also chanting against the ICE agents. Take a look at some of these images. All right, some pretty interesting images there, and we are joined in this broadcast by my colleague Susan Tehrani, who is of course now joining us all the way from New York with more updates on this extremely high-profile election for a mayor for the city of New York. Susan, for people who are watching this from outside of America, give us a sense of what the issues of the people of New York actually are, and in each of these candidates, who is clearly, someone who is addressing the issues of the people of New York.
Yeah, that's just such a valid question. And just like the general elections that we had a few months ago, it's the issue of affordability, the cost of living, and how most New Yorkers just believe that they're being priced out of the city that they've been living in and thriving in for so long because everything is just so expensive. Housing is such an important issue. Now, Zoran Mamdani from the very beginning has stuck to his guns. He's been very clear that he wants to tackle the issue of affordability of housing, and he's stuck to his message and tried not to deviate from that. And that may be one of the reasons why he's doing so well in the polls. Last night, Andrew Cuomo sort of, appeared to come as in more experienced, more measured, sort of talking about his records when it came to housing and the issue of affordability as well. Whether or not he swayed enough voters away from Mamdani to convince them that he's the right person for the job, well, that's a big question mark. Last night's debate really didn't have a lot of fireworks in it, despite the fact that some newspapers and some individuals are saying that Andrew Cuomo clearly won the debate. But ultimately, what happens at the polls on November 4th is very important. So Zoran Mamdani, really, he's the one who's been really on message, tackling these issues, the main concerns for New Yorkers. But then there's also the issue of, Zoran Mamdani and his past comments when it comes to the Jewish American community. The New York City has a very vibrant Jewish population. They're concerned about anti-Semitism should someone like Zoran Mamdani, because of the past comments that he's made and the associations that he's had, will have on the elections. And then, of course, it's Curtis Silva. He makes some very valid points, but it seems like he just cannot win the hearts and minds of enough New Yorkers to really have a chance at this election. And he said that he's not stepping out. I will say what's interesting is, despite the fact that Andrew Cuomo, who has a lot of experience and sort of talked about his experience a lot during last night's debate, for better or worse, he is second place. But the people, it seems the majority of people who are voting for him are not voting for him. They're just voting against Zoran Mamdani.
Right.
So it's a very interesting dynamic. It's a very interesting election, and it'll definitely show where the Democrat Party is headed moving into the future nationally as well.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Susan Tehrani, for joining us with all those updates then. All right, let's now shift our attention to this other big story where the American forces have again struck yet another vessel that they allege was carrying narcotics. And this time, the American forces have targeted a vessel in the waters of the Pacific Ocean. The development has been confirmed by the Pentagon, and a video shared by Pete Hegseth, who interestingly is now the Secretary of War Department, appears to show a long blue speedboat that is moving through the waters before it is struck by an American missile. Now, Pete Hegseth said that 2 people were on board this vessel and both of them were killed, adding that this vessel was known to the American intelligence and was believed to be carrying, this is what is important, it was believed to be carrying by the American intelligence to be carrying drugs along a known trafficking route in international waters. Now, the strike marks the 8th US strike against suspected drug boats since the 2nd of September, but the first in the Pacific. And until now, the strikes had only taken place in the Caribbean. In a post on social media, Pete Hegseth warned the narco-terrorists intending to bring what he labelled as poison to the US shores. And he said that they'll find no safe harbour anywhere in the country's hemisphere. Now, the United States estimates from the Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA, indicate that the vast majority of cocaine bound for the American cities passes through the Pacific route. Now, drug seizures in the Caribbean account for a much more smaller percentage of the total, although the US officials have warned that it is rising. Now, President Donald Trump and his Colombian counterpart, Gustavo Petro, have traded barbs as the United States announced its first strike on the alleged drug smuggling boat in the Pacific Ocean. Now, Trump, remember, has again branded Gustavo Petro as a thug and has suggested that he is a drug trafficker, leading his country to ruins, prompting Petro to hit back, saying that he will defend himself legally with American lawyers. Now, Trump said that vital military aid to Colombia had been cut and has warned Gustavo Petro to watch it, hours after Pete Hegseth shared the video of the boats engulfed in flames.
We've just, as of today, stopped all payments going to Colombia, the country Colombia. Also, the school Colombia. No, we settled. We made a settlement with him. But no, he's a thug, and he's a bad guy, and he's hurt his country very badly.
Now, regional tensions have flared with Colombia recalling its ambassador to Washington and Venezuela, accusing the United States of plotting to overthrow President Nicolas Maduro, who said on Wednesday that his country has 5,000 Russian man-portable surface-to-air missiles to counter the American forces that are now being stationed in the Caribbean.
This simulation equipment puts us in a position for good aim with thousands of Igla-S operators that we have in every mountain, every village, every city that you can imagine in Venezuelan territory, from north to south, from east to west, which must be an impregnable homeland. Let no one mess with Venezuela, because we don't mess with anyone.
All right, now joining us on the broadcast, we've got Ms. Johanna LeBlanc, who's a national security law analyst and a foreign relations expert. Ms. LeBlanc, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on WION. Now, this is pretty dramatic. You know, it's a lot of people would say that this is clearly an escalation in a region which had been relatively quiet, because what we've witnessed is that there have been at least about 7 to 8 of these American strikes on vessels earlier in the Caribbean, now also in the Pacific, which the American administration claims is clamping down on narco trafficking. But there's also this strident Trump rhetoric which is targeting the Venezuelan president and also the Colombian president, describing them as drug dealers. Is this approach sitting well with people within the United States of America? Is this an approach which people in America would approve?
Well, this is not simply about one boat and one strike. What you're seeing here is a collision of three fundamental interests, right? The homeland security, maritime domain awareness, and regional sovereignty, and certainly under the Monroe Doctrine. The U.S. has a compelling interest in disrupting the flow of illicit narcotics coming out of Colombia and throughout the region, right? And as you know, for Colombia, these narcotics make up roughly 4.2% of the country's GDP. That is significant, and most of it goes to North America, and certainly including the United States. However, if the U.S. takes lethal actions without full clarity on the target, because there are some reports that states that perhaps the vessels carrying narcotics were not the only ones targeted, but also boats of ordinary citizens were targeted, right? So what that will do is, if that is indeed the case, it really risks undermining legitimacy on the U.S. side, and also alienating regional partners and further fueling propaganda by the United States adversaries such as China and certainly Russia. So the doctrine of self-defense here in armed conflict is stretched in these types of cases. And many people have argued that these strikes may even violate international law based on what I just shared with you.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned the Monroe Doctrine, which clearly states that America, of course, will exercise its hegemony in that region. But by doing what Donald Trump is doing, by taking this by resorting to strident rhetoric and also carrying out what many people would say is killings in international waters, is this not one severing relations with a nation like Colombia, which has been a good ally of the United States of America, and also not allowing other players like Russia and China to perhaps get into a region where they do not exist in such a huge amount of, shall we say, force? Because these nations would now want to look for international allies who can help them out if the United States is having a go at them militarily. How does the United States respond to that?
I think you made a very, very valid point. We saw that in the case of Venezuela. We saw under President Trump's first term, when President Maduro was elected, the United States did not recognize Maduro as a legitimate leader of Venezuela. Instead, the United States had recognized El Guaido as the president of Venezuela. And what we saw was with Maduro, that decision forced him to further strengthen ties with countries like China as well as Russia to ensure that he maintains and retains power. Because one of the things that the U.S. does is when the U.S. no longer supports you, it brings others in the region, right, to also not support you. And many countries in the region, like Haiti and countless others, during Trump's first administration, did not recognize Maduro as the legitimate leader of Venezuela even after the election. So you are absolutely absolutely correct. When we're seeing these actions take place, I think in some instances it may push some of America's partners and friends closer to our adversaries like China and Russia.
Interesting. Thank you very much indeed, Ms. LeBlanc, for joining us with that perspective then.
Thank you.
All right, let's now shift our attention to what is happening in India. And this, remember, is a crucial election. It is the battle for the Indian state of Bihar, where the political temperature is clearly going up ahead of a high-stakes assembly election amidst reports of feud and fissures within the opposition India bloc. Now, the alliance, however, the India alliance, that is, has announced the RJD leader Tejasvi Yadav as the bloc's chief ministerial face. Now, in a show of strength and unity, the India alliance addressed a joint press conference in the capital city of Patna, and it has now dared the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party JDU combined to name its chief ministerial face. Now, the India bloc has also declared Mukesh Sahni of the VIP party as its deputy chief minister.
अमित शाह जी ने जो कहा है एनडीए की तरफ से कौन होगा चेहरा, अभी तक कोई जॉइंट प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस करके जो है ना तो विजन बताया गया, ना एजेंडा बताया गया है, ना ही सीएम की घोषणा की गई है। और जो अमित शाह जी का जो बयान आया साफ दिखाता है कि नीतीश कुमार को वो मुख्यमंत्री बनाने नहीं जा रहे हैं।
Now, the announcement has put the ruling NDA in a bit of a tricky spot. Historically, the Bharatiya Janata Party has fought under the leadership of the incumbent Chief Minister Nitish Kumar. But lately, the JDU Supremo has faced increased scrutiny over his age and his health, making the Bharatiya Janata Party very wary of publicly backing Nitish Kumar as its chief ministerial candidate. Now, responding to the India bloc's announcement, the NDA leaders have refused to overtly back Nitish as their chief ministerial candidate, while the BJP leader Shah Nawaz Hussain and the LJP chief Chirag Paswan have said that the NDA will fight under his leadership. They've also added that the chief minister will be decided by the NDA partners once the results are in. Now, others like the Deputy Chief Minister Samrat Chaudhary have slammed the opposition for choosing the son of a tainted chief minister as their chief ministerial candidate.
अमित शाह जी ऐलान कर चुके हैं कि नीतीश कुमार जी के नेतृत्व में लड़ेंगे, जीतेंगे और सरकार बनाएंगे। इसके बाद और कोई घोषणा की क्या ज़रूरत है?
मेरा विश्वास है कि एक बार फिर से तमाम विधायक मेरे हों, भाजपा के हों, जदयू के हों, राष्ट्रीय लोक मोर्चा के हों, हिंदुस्तानी अवाम मोर्चा के हों, एक बार फिर से मुख्यमंत्री नीतीश कुमार जी को 14 नवंबर के बाद एक बार फिर से उनको मुख्यमंत्री पद की शपथ उनको दिलाई जाएगी। उनके नेतृत्व में चुनाव हो रहा है, मुख्यमंत्री भी वही होंगे।
मुख्यमंत्री कौन होगा? एक भ्रष्टाचारी का बेटा बिहार का मुख्यमंत्री का उम्मीदवार बन रहा है, ये सपना देख रहा है, इससे ज्यादा कुछ नहीं है।
Now, the India bloc's declaration has come amidst reports of a tussle within the alliance over seat allocation. Earlier, the veteran Congress leader and the former Rajasthan Chief Minister Ashok Gehlot was also flown in a last-ditch attempt to try and resolve the crisis. Now, Gehlot met with the senior leaders of the India bloc, including RJD's Tejasvi Yadav, to mediate between the alliance partners. The move has put the Bharatiya Janata Party-led NDA on the back foot. With the India bloc partners rallying under Tejasvi's name, the ball is now clearly in NDA's court. Now, Bihar votes in two phases on the 6th of November and on the 11th of November. And the counting of votes will take place on the 14th of November, and the results will, of course, be declared along with the counting of the votes. Now, months ahead of the general elections, Bangladesh's interim leader Mohammad Yunus has come under fire as the political parties question the impartiality of his cabinet. Nahid Islam, the convener of the National Citizens Party, has alleged that some of Yunus' advisors are collaborating with the political parties to secure their quote-unquote safe exit in the future administration. Similar accusations of partisan bias from rival parties, including the Jamaat-e-Islami, have sent the political tensions soaring in Bangladesh. Now, in a bid to ease the tensions, the interim leader, Yunus, met with delegations from both the political parties and has assured them that the interim government will take all steps to ensure free, fair and impartial elections early next year. Earlier, the senior Jamaat leader, Abdullah Muhammad Tahir, had warned Yunus that some of his advisors had been misleading him and were working on behalf of certain political party. The warning followed a meeting between Yunus and a delegation of the Bangladesh National Party, seen as the front-runner in the upcoming polls. The report suggests that the BNP had shared the names of two advisors with the interim government and had sought their dismissal. Now, next year's general elections will be the first in Bangladesh since the ouster of the former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Hasina had fled to India in August last year after a student-led uprising, and the Awami League is barred from taking part in the polls. Netherlands is scheduled to hold snap elections 4 months after the coalition government fell. And now the race is between three contenders that are seeking a decisive majority in the parliament. The voters will head to polls on the 29th of October. The first and the front-running party is the PVV, which is led by Geert Wilders, who pulled out of the last government and led to its collapse in June this year. Now, Geert Wilders has gained support for his anti-immigration pitch, calling for a complete freeze on asylum seekers. His other electoral promise includes deploying the army to fight what he claims street terrorists, end of the quote-unquote woke indoctrination in schools, and for male Ukrainian refugees to be sent back home. Now, close on the heels of the PVV are the Christian Democrats. More recently, the CDA lost its popularity after enjoying a 20-year political dominance. But now many expect the party's rising star, Henry Bontebal, to bring back the party's former glory. Now, Bontebal entered politics only 4 years ago and has pegged his entire election campaign on the Dutch housing crisis. Amidst veteran politicians, Bontebal promises a fresh wave of what he calls normal civilized politics. The third contender on the list is Frans Timmermans, a former European commissioner who leads the Green Left Labour alliance, and the migration pitch by Timmermans has garnered attention, with the veteran leader proposing a controversial upper limit on migration. His immigration bid puts a cap between 40,000 and 60,000 people a year in the party manifesto. Now, there are several other parties in the mix which are slated to win a few seats in the parliament. The Liberal Progressive D66, the Liberal Conservative VVD, the Populist Hardline Conservative JA21, and all three are expected to win enough seats to stop any one key contender from winning a clear majority. And amongst the overlapping electoral promises and the many political parties contesting next week, voters are confused about who they will cast the ballot for. Listen to what some of them have had to say ahead of the snap election next week.
There are so many political parties that you don't know which to choose. Yes, really. I have a sheet with such a list. Well, isn't that difficult? One party steals ideas from the other. You can't possibly get away with that, can you?
I've looked at the party programs and I can't figure it out. All kinds of things are being promised that, in my opinion, are completely impossible. And that means I still don't know who I'm going to vote for.
En dat maakt dat ik nog niet weet waar ik op ga stemmen.
And without a wrap on this edition of Race to Power, thanks for watching.
From the bustling trading floors of Wall Street